Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Angela Starren, Senior Director of Advancement at the Lincoln Presidential Foundation, and I'm so glad you can join us for today's latest generation film contest mentor session, Authentic Voices, Powerful Stories, Indigenous Representation on Film. We are thrilled to be joined today by recent Vice Chair of the Kaw Nation and leading public historian James Pepper Henry, and writer, director, and producer Jeremy Charles of Pursuit Films. At the Lincoln Presidential Foundation, our mission is to share the story of Abraham Lincoln's life, legacy, and leadership with all people. Our latest generation film contest takes its name from the powerful question Lincoln asked to a crowd in 1861. Shall the Union and shall the liberties of this country be preserved to the latest generation? This year's theme, Think Anew, Act Anew, American Innovators and Changemakers, is inspired by Lincoln's 1862 annual message to Congress, where he said, "As our case is new, so we must think anew and act anew." This theme encourages projects that explore people, communities, or movements in the United States that met generational challenges with creativity, innovation, and bold action. Now, in its second year, the contest is open to participants ages 14 to 22 across the United States. Submissions are due February 28th, 2026, with cash prizes from $500 to $2,000 in three age categories. The winning films will premiere at a red carpet event in Chicago in spring 2026. These mentor sessions are open to everyone and are designed to help you understand how filmmakers bring accurate, meaningful stories to life. The program is offered in partnership with the Better Angels Society with generous support from its Amy Marjoram Berg Education Fund. And before we begin, quick note, your cameras will remain off, but you're welcome to send questions anytime through the Q&A, and we'll try to get to as many questions as we can toward the end. And now, to get a sense of where everyone is starting from, we're going to begin with a quick poll. That. Okay. I'll give you a little time to complete it. How confident are you in your ability to ethically include Indigenous perspectives and storytellers in documentary film? So, answer that. Okay. So we have a few people in every category. So thank you so much for answering. It's great to have you all here, and with different confidence levels, um, our mentors are going to cover the essentials so everyone gets a little more comfortable with doing this ethically. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our mentors. James Pepper Henry is principal of Pepper and Associates, a Native American owned and operated museum planning firm supporting the design and development of cultural institutions that represent Indigenous and underserved communities. He's the former Cultural Resources Director and former Vice Chairman of the Kaw Nation and President of the Kanza Heritage Society. He's Director Emeritus of the First Americans Museum in Oklahoma City and previously led the Gilcrease Museum, the Heard Museum, the Anchorage Museum, and served as Associate Director of the Smithsonian's National Museum of the American Indian, where he played a key role in launching the museum on the National Mall. Jeremy Charles, him, is a Cherokee writer, director, and producer, and founder of Pursuit Films, a native-owned production company. His storytelling and commitment to Indigenous representation have earned Webby Awards, Anthem Awards, Emmys, and Tellys. His films have screened worldwide, and as co-creator of OCO, Voices of the Cherokee People, he helped the series earn 29 regional Emmys. He's an alum of the Native American Media Alliance TV Writers Fellowship, a Vision Maker mentor, and serves on the advisory board of the Tri-City Collective. We're so excited to have both of them with us today. Please take it away, James.
Koya kage nika kage wako, jaje witache hinksheska. My name is Jim Pepper Henry. and I am an enrolled member of the Kaw Nation, and very excited to be here today and talk about some of our experiences working within Indigenous communities, and worked with Jeremy on several projects. As mentioned, I'm the former director of First Americans Museum, and I've known Jeremy for quite a while, but we worked together on developing content for the new First Americans Museum, and working with all 39 tribes in Oklahoma and working in communities to develop content for the exhibitions, and working with Indigenous communities and working with any community really. There are some protocols and things to think about when working with especially Native communities, and having connections and insights into those communities is very helpful when recording media. And you have to understand that uh, for a long time, uh, people have taken advantage of Native communities and intellectual property, appropriating Native culture. And so many Native communities are very wary of people coming into their communities and wanting to get information, wanting to film, um, do scholarly research. And so we, both Jeremy and I, have this methodology or philosophy that if you're going to work with the Native communities, for whatever project it might be, it needs to be reciprocal. There needs to be something that goes back to the community, because people have just taken from communities and not given anything back. And so we have that attitude and that approach when we work with Indigenous communities, and that whatever we do, if we have permission to work with the communities, then um, especially in filmmaking, that the content that we gather will be the intellectual property of the community, and we want to return that footage and that media that we produce back to the community. And of course, that's a resource for the community, and eventually it becomes very important as the generations go by that people have this information. Um, and it's very important to establish relationships with communities before going in and creating media or filming in communities. And it always helps to have somebody from that community to kind of be an ambassador or liaison for the project, so you're not going in cold. Now, Jeremy and I have a little bit of advantage because we're native, and it provides some ease of comfort when we work with those communities. And but still, it's very important to have the tribe identify somebody from that community to work with us, and to kind of be that liaison working within those communities, just to help people feel comfortable. And um, so we work with all 39 tribes in Oklahoma, developing content. Jeremy just finished a project called Reunions, where we interviewed people that were connected with objects that were at the Smithsonian Institution that their ancestors had created 100, 120 years ago, and reintroducing these objects to the descendants of the people that made them, and getting the stories about these objects and about the people who created those items. And Jeremy and I also worked on a project in my community, the Kaw Nation, about the repatriation of a very important sacred item to our tribe, a sacred red rock. And when I say rock, it's a 15-foot tall, 28-ton red quartzite stone. And we'll tell you a little bit more about that. We have a little trailer we're going to share with you in a little bit about the return of that rock. But we documented the process of that repatriation, or that what we call rematriation of that stone to our community. It was taken from us 100 years ago by the descendants of settlers into a town in Kansas, and we'll get into that in a minute. But anyway, so today we want to talk about working with Indigenous communities, kind of the protocols of working with communities, and why it's so important that it's a reciprocal relationship, that people just aren't taking intellectual property from these communities for their own benefit and not giving something back. And we feel that's very important. That's part of our DNA to be able to do that. And I'm going to hand it over to Jeremy to talk. He can talk a little bit about his work and then working together on these projects.
Well, James, JPH, as we call him. He's known fondly as JPH. Um, Osio Nagad, Jeremy Charles Dagwadoa. My name is Jeremy Charles. I am a Cherokee filmmaker based in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And I have a company called Pursuit Films, and we are in our 11th year of existence. And my background is I've done a lot of things. Um, I've been a writer, graphic designer. Um, I spent a lot of time as a photographer. And at the end of that career, I was doing a lot of work for my tribe and other tribes. And I felt the calling that I needed to be making films. And so I followed my spirit, told me to start making films, and immediately began work on a show that's still going on today called OCO TV, OCO Voices of the Cherokee People, which is a documentary series about the Cherokee people that is available nationwide still and online. Um, my journey, kind of harkening back to what JPH was saying, um, at the time, this was, if you think 11 years ago, some of you out there are young folks, right? And it was a little bit different of a scenario when we were your age. Um, it was really, as JPH, I'm going to kind of tag along with some of the things he was saying. For so many millennia, I mean, or even centuries since America has been a thing. Native stories have been told for us, right? If you think about the Western movies and anything you think of, probably that comes to mind first, your mind first most is probably something that was told for Native Americans. And so um, I knew that was a time for a change. And JPH's work has been kind of illuminating this, but we decided that as a company, we would hand the microphone back to the native folks themselves and to my people and other tribes all over Turtle Island. Turtle Island is what a lot of our tribes call North America. Um, and give agency back to the subject of the film and let folks tell their own stories in their own way. Because as we all know, history is leaves a lot of gaps, right? There's a lot of gaps in history that have been filled in by other folks. But when you think of indigenous peoples, there were thousands of tribes before America came along, right? And even today, there's almost nearly 600 federally recognized tribes. Each one of those tribes and communities are distinct peoples. And so when we're thinking about Native America and Native country, we're really thinking about hundreds of distinct cultures. And it's really hard for um, the American mindset to, I think we tend to lump Native peoples together into a monolith. But the fact is, um, JPH's tribes and lineage, the Kaw Nation, and he's also Cherokee and Muskogee, and in my tribe, the Cherokee Nation, completely different cultures. And so the biggest job that we have to do is to communicate to people that these are all distinct cultures, and we can't lump everyone together. When we see uh, m- people wearing headdresses at Coachella or something like, all of these kind of things that we see of appropriation that what JPH was talking about, those may seem innocent to maybe to Americans broadly, but the problem is you're missing the nuance in Native cultures. And so, as far as working in Native America is why we're here today. Um, as JPH was saying, we've had our stories told for us for a very long time, for centuries at this point. And so when you come into a Native community and you're wanting to make a film, um, you're gonna, people are rightfully suspicious of you because they know this pattern, um, they know how this has worked in the past. And so our work, JPH and mine, and through the decades has been, how can we regain that trust? How can we regain the trust in order to be able to have the privilege? So I think of in the terms of a privilege to be able to carry on a story, right? Because carrying on stories is a responsibility in Native country. Um, and something else JPH touched on that I'd like to really put a pin on is reciprocity versus extraction, right? We live in a kind of an extractive culture, where we take what we want, we take things and we use them. In Native country, um, the world and the way you view the world is relational and is reciprocal. So I give and I take, right? And so to underscore what JPH was saying earlier, our work is based on earning trust, which is the first step, and it's not easy, but also providing something of value that is not a Hollywood production coming in and like, all right, y'all work your butt off and then leave and then all right, see you later, right? Um, that's not how we function as filmmakers and as um, I would say cultural anthropologists in a way, right? A new style of cultural anthropologist that is native centered. JPH, do you think we should show them a little bit of the film?
Yeah, and I want to emphasize something that you just said that for us, you said at the beginning of your talk is that other people have been telling our stories, and we're finally taking control of that, and we're telling our own stories now. And Jeremy's really good about providing an environment for that to happen where people feel comfortable enough to tell their stories. And so what we're going to show you here in a minute is really our story, the Kaw Nation story about this sacred red rock. It's not in the third person. It's not, you know, uh, Richard Attenborough narrating a story about the rock. It's us telling our story about the rock. And I think that's so powerful when you hear the voices of the people telling their own story. And we tried to make that happen. And we did a great job at First Americans Museum where um, we developed our inaugural exhibits for this museum, which is in Oklahoma City. And it's really the first museum on this scale where every word in that in the galleries in the exhibitions is in the first person voice, not the third person voice. So we're telling our stories from our perspective. All the media is of members of those tribes in Oklahoma telling stories, and so that makes it much more powerful, and it's empowering too for Indigenous peoples to be able to finally tell our stories rather than having somebody who's never been a part of that community or somebody who's just trying to draw attention to themselves telling these stories that we can tell our stories from our perspective. And sometimes it's not pretty. Um, we're not, our stories aren't told in schools. They're not in the curriculum. When I grew up, I didn't hear many stories about Native Americans, and when I did, it was very sanitized. But truth telling is a very important part of what we do too. That first person voice, and then telling our truths, our perspective of the world, rather than the dominant society's perspective of who we are. So, I don't, Jeremy, you want to set up the trailer?
Yeah, and I think you can help me set this up. So, um, we were talking about truth telling, right? That's kind of, if you want to kind of find a center for the work that I do and that JPH does, is like, um, there's a version of every story you've heard that may not be the same version that you've heard in your history books or been ignored, right? And so, um, for example, this film that we worked on together, it's called The Return of the Sacred Red Rock, in which you'll see JPH is a main character here. Um, what we needed to accomplish was, when you're working in native country, you have a couple challenges. And I think anyone who in the audience who may be working in a marginalized community, whether it be native or not, um, there's context that you have to provide for the audience. So it adds an extra layer into your storytelling. Um, JPH, tell us, I mean, I think it'd be helpful. I like your story about the name Kanza and with Senator Dole. Would you tell that story?
Sure. Just most people haven't heard of my tribe, the Kaw Nation. Kaw is short for Kanza or Kanza. I talk about that in the film, but the state of Kansas is named after my tribe, and we were one of the main tribes in the area we call Kansas today. And we were removed from Kansas by the federal government to Indian Territory, which is now Oklahoma, in the 1870s. But we were very connected to that land. Our DNA really is tied to the land in Kansas, and we had many sacred sites and village sites and sacred items that were part of our ecosystem as the Kaw Nation or the Kaw people. And so we were removed from our homelands. We had to leave all the things that were important to us behind when we moved to Oklahoma, and we had hardships once we got to Oklahoma. But other tribes were moved in after us into Kansas, and then settlers were moved into that to that land. So our land was taken from us and then essentially given to white settlers moving in from the east. And in some cases, the land was sold too. Um, but we got disconnected from the things that were sacred to us, important to us. And one of these things was this uh, red quartzite stone, um, this giant red quartzite stone, about 15 feet tall, weighs about 28 tons. It was on the banks of the Kansas River. And this was a gathering place for us, for the Kaw people. We didn't worship the rock, but it was kind of like a church for us where we would come and have our ceremonies there. The rock was something that we felt had the qualities of the creator. We call the creator Wakonda, and Wakonda, not to be confused with Black Panther, but
Black Panther may have borrowed
I
from.
think they appropriated our words, our Kaw words. But anyway, um, so the stone was very important to us, and had the qualities of the creator embodied in that, and we would have our ceremonies there. And the rock probably came down on a glacier a couple 100,000 years ago. One of the ice ages brought the rock down to what is now the Kansas River in Kansas. And it stuck out because of its color. You think of the green prairie lands, and then all of a sudden there's this red stone that's not associated with any other stones in that area. So we would have been attracted to that stone, and it was also a kind of a marker, a geographic marker to let people know that they were in Kaw territory, other tribes. And so we were removed to Oklahoma, and then white settlers knew about the stone. They called it the Kaw Prayer Rock. It was kind of a famous stone and had a little mystique to whites. And so when we left, we were removed from Kansas. Settlers came in, and their descendants appropriated the stone, took it from its place along the Kansas River, and placed it in a little park next to City Hall in Lawrence, Kansas, and put a giant bronze plaque on the stone and dedicated it to the hardship of the pioneers, their ancestors that came into that area. And these were abolitionists or free staters that came from New England into Kansas looking for freedom. But the irony is that our freedom was taken from us as an indigenous group of people so that these white settlers could have our land and have their freedom. And so there's a lot of irony here in this, but I think Jeremy's done a great job of kind of capturing the history of the stone, the history of the Kaw people, and that relationship that we had with the settlers. and then the process of eventually having this stone returned to the Kaw Nation. The stone is back now with the Kaw Nation. A few years ago, the city of Lawrence agreed to return the stone to the Kaw people. So we've documented this process, and this is just one story among thousands of stories that are just like this among Indigenous peoples. And, we're fortunate enough to be able to have something so important to us returned to us to be the rightful stewards of the stone. But every tribe has probably several stories that are like this. And this is a little slice of Americana that most people don't know, have never heard of, part of our history that would never be taught anywhere. And we're finally kind of telling this story. And for those of you watching this today and being inspired, there's so many stories that you can tell, especially young Indigenous people's stories that should be told and told in your way, the way you want to tell the stories in your voices. And so this is an example of that. And I guess we can go ahead and show anything else you want to say about the trailer?
I'm going to play a little bit of a short video for you all, but I think what's important here is when we're telling stories in Native country, Indigenous country, we have to tell a little bit of history, right? Because the people don't know it. And we're going to get into this a little bit later. Native peoples are not trapped in amber. We're not stuck in the past, right? And so, and I want to tell you now, I want to prime this now. You as young filmmakers, it's going to be your job to push into the future, push beyond where you've seen us go. So without further ado, let me play.
One more thing before
Okay.
we start. And Jeremy was great about pushing this too, is that it was important to incorporate our language into the story. And language is part of our culture. And we can't be who we are without our language. That's an important element of what makes us Kaw people. And Jeremy ensured, and we almost lost our language at one point in time, and we spent the last 25 years or so revitalizing our language. And so we felt it, and Jeremy in particular felt it was very important to include our language in this. And that's going to be important for the future too, for future generations, that we're telling our story in English, but we're also telling it in our language. And I can't emphasize how important that was on this project.
Okay, more on this in a bit. I'm going to go ahead and play. See if let me go full screen. All right, you all enjoy.
Oyage mi owiblage damike. Injuje wahobe.
Injuje wahobe.
Injuje wahobe.
Injuje wahobe.
In is stone. Juje is our color red. And wahobe that's one of those words that has like a lot of meaning into it. Wahobe, sacred.
The story goes, in 1929, in the dark of the night, Lawrence got the railroad to help them, and they took Injuje Wahobe out of the river and put him in a little park in downtown Lawrence.
They put this bronze plaque on the stone and dedicated it to themselves,
Honoring the founders of Lawrence.
This was a way to erase us from the memory of the land. And I made a vow that someday the stone, it would come back to the Kaw people.
The Konse Nikujinga are the original inhabitants of this land called Kansas. We have been separated from our grandfather for more than 150 years, and we look forward to being reacquainted.
In a spirit of reconciliation and deep respect for the people of the Kaw Nation, the city and the county agreed to cooperate fully in the return of Injuje Wahobe to Kaw Nation.
And today you step in and say, Ranger, we get a guest from the south wind. People of the Conga, the people of the wind, the south wind. Beautiful sight.
You know, communities have to start somewhere, and the best place to start is with honest conversations about the past. I've been proud of our elected officials who have stood up and said, you know, our community made a mistake and we want to try to make it right.
If we don't have our history, and we don't have our culture and our cultural lifeways, and we don't have our language, then we cease to exist as Kaw people.
To have Njuje Wahobe returned to the Kaw people,
That's only going to make us stronger. The ones watching over us and seeing that we're doing a good job, there's going to be growth and there's going to be blessings from that. I know that it's going to come back to our people, and we will never let that happen again. The heart's starting to pump again. Yegoji wichigo aka aki aka. This is the story of Njuje Wahobe, our sacred red rock.
So to tag on to what JPH was saying earlier, some of the things that we have to talk about history. We have to talk about the pieces of history that had not maybe continued to not be taught. We also, for JPH was saying the importance of language. And I'm not going to get on a soapbox here, but indigenous languages are dying every day. And so it's really important, I think, and I don't want to go on a tangent about this, but we have to incorporate the language into our films that we make about indigenous peoples. The most important thing is to provide an example for folks of your generation here in the audience, that this language is who you are, right? And I think you heard JPH say this. If we don't have our language and we don't have our history, then who are we, right? And so being absolutely doing whatever we can to bring that to the forefront. Indigenous languages are not like English, I'll put it that way. And JPH can tell you about more like that. That's why it's important to include them. The way of thinking for indigenous peoples is not the same as you and I think as in a colonized mindset, right? That's just America. That's just Western culture. Indigenous peoples do not think. If you're a language speaker, they just don't think the way that you and I think. So it's really vital that we do whatever we can. In this film, for example, we knew we needed the Kaw language to be heard because it's been a very long time since folks have heard the Kaw language. And I can tell you, and we can get into this a little bit, like the impact of that, I think, has been tremendous. I also want to say, and I'm kind of teeing up a few different topics to you, JPH here. Like, we, even as JPH was a Kaw Nation citizen, and I'm an Indigenous filmmaker, we still faced resistance to telling these stories because of the lack of trust that's been built up over the years, right? And so whenever we were wanting to, especially to incorporate the language, people have questions, right? What are they going to do? Are we going to be exploited once again? Are we going to, these thoughts are always ever present if you're working in a marginalized community. No matter, I don't know how we're represented here in this audience here, but it's always present in the Native communities. Like, how are we going to be exploited this time? right? And so it was a multi-year, faceted approach of gaining trust and being there, being solid and being trustworthy. If you are making a film, no film that is long is get in and get out. This is really a lifelong commitment from JPH, but also from myself. I will always know these folks, and they will always have a relationship with me. That's a little bit different if you're talking about filmmaking and maybe a Western mindset. JPH, feel free to jump in here. Would you like to say anything about that?
Yeah, and we, even though I'm a citizen of the Kaw Nation, I can't speak for all of my people. And most tribes have some form of government and self-governance where we have our own constitutions, we have our own leadership, and there's a protocol uh, when working with tribes, and it's always appropriate to either contact or send a letter or whatever to the tribal leader and say, this is what we'd like to do, and we'd like your assistance in this. And is there somebody, if you agree to this, is there somebody within the community we can work with? And that's what we did at First Americans Museum. We sent letters to all 39 tribal leaders telling them what we were doing and what we wanted to do and what we were going to do with the intellectual property that we were going to gather during the process of filming. And that's really important because rather than just going in unannounced or going in without people understanding what you're doing can cause a lot of trouble. So we follow those protocols, respecting the leadership and the governments of these tribal nations when we were filming, because the film represents the tribe. And so that was the first step. And then making sure that we worked with people within that community that had the blessing or at least the acknowledgement of the tribal government, and were able to uh, uh, have access to some of the programs like the language program and other things that most people wouldn't have access to. Um, so that was really important to establish those relationships. And then, as we said in the beginning of this conversation, that what were we going to do to help the tribe, or how is the tribe going to benefit from all of this? Yes, we're having our story told, but there's hundreds of hours of of footage that we didn't use in the film, and we made sure that the tribe, in the end, once the process was done, that the tribe would have ownership of this film after it makes its rounds through we're starting to show this film now on the film festival circuit and so forth. But the tribe eventually will end up owning this film, and they'll have the extra footage that we took as a resource. Some of the people we filmed are gone now. During the course of this 4-year project or so, we've lost a few people along the way, and that becomes even more important. That footage that we captured of folks, that becomes a resource for the tribe. So establishing that trust and those relationships are really important when working with Indigenous communities. Yes, we had a little bit of advantage on this one because I'm a member of that community. It doesn't mean I got along with everybody within the community either, but at least there was a level of comfort there. And we did. It's unusual, and it's probably not something I'd recommend if you can help it, but we, just because of the different opinions people have, but we did share this with the tribal council, and they did have some editorial control. There were some things that were sensitive in the film that we originally had in there that some of the tribal council members were uncomfortable having shown to the broader public. And I can understand that. Not every part of our culture is open for anybody to know about. And they wanted to keep certain things within the community, and we respected that. So we did take some things out of the film after consulting with the tribal council, who had some editorial control over that. But that helped strengthen the relationship between us and the tribe by acknowledging those concerns and addressing those concerns when we developed the film.
Yeah, and I kind of want to kind of turn the conversation a little bit to, our audience here. I wish I could see you all. I would do a lot better. But um, JPH and I are of a different generation. We're in a transition period for for Native country, but also all of our marginalized communities. You all out there are now coming into the fore, and now it's going to be your responsibility to tell these stories. Something that you notice in this film, we're still processing trauma in Indigenous communities. We will continue to process trauma, right? But you and your generation of filmmakers, it's really important for you to know that um, you have to represent. If I were in your shoes, I would represent my people, my subjects, my community in a contemporary way. And so, what you didn't see in this trailer is um, we talk a lot about pain. But the takeaway of this film is there's a future ahead of us, and we're still here. We're still contemporary people. Our culture has not died. Our culture is thriving once again, and it's growing and it's rebuilding. And we are not relics of the past. We are contemporary people. And so a lot of the work that I do in filmmaking, beyond this film, of course, and several films, is to make sure that um, Indigenous peoples are seen as modern peoples, right? And as seen as having as much stake in America and our society and the legacy of Lincoln as anyone else does who's a part of this, this nation and this fabric of our culture. In fact, I would say America in general has a lot to learn from Indigenous peoples, a lot to learn. JPH can talk more about this, but knowing our history, but also knowing how Indigenous peoples think and function in the world is the time we're in. It's very vital to tell these stories. It's absolutely vital. And no matter what community you're from out there, um, your voice is vital because you make the fabric of this nation. You make the fabric of this culture and the story. And the only way for you to preserve that is to go out and make these stories and to tell these stories, to write, to make films, to make art. That is the way you change the world. That's the way you preserve your culture and history. JPH, do you have anything to add to that or riff off of?
No, I think it's very eloquent and just one thing about a different way of thinking within indigenous communities. We never said that the rock belonged to the Kaw people. We say we belong to the rock in this film, and it's the same with land. And I know there are a lot of land acknowledgments out there now that are kind of popular right now, but that's just a Western way of thinking that land can be commodified, and we don't look at it that way. We say we belong to the land, not that the land belongs to us. And that was, I think you get a sense of that in this film that we feel we have a connection with the stone, but we belong to it and we have a responsibility to that stone. So just that different mindset, the different way we think of the world, and of course that's been exploited by Western cultures because we didn't think of the world in the same way, and people took advantage of that. But now we have a chance to kind of tell our perspective and the way we look at the world, which I think, as Jeremy said, it takes all of us to make this beautiful, quilt of all these different cultures, especially in this country, that it's, there's so many beautiful stories and beautiful people that we just get ignored or pushed to the side. So um, anyway, I'm sure, is it time? We've got a few minutes left. I'm sure people might have some questions for us. Angela or Kristen? See if any folks have any questions in the comments?
I would like to encourage people to jump in. Um, so one of the things that I was wondering, as people, please do toss in your questions in the Q&A. But the reciprocity and approaching the tribal government. So would you say anything else about how to approach the tribal government and let people know that you want to give and not just take in telling the story? And if somebody doesn't have a connection with the community that they want to tell the story about, would you discourage them from even trying, or would you give them guidance about how to do it? What would you suggest?
I'll say that I I think it's important to think about what you're trying to do. What's your goal? What's the goal of your project? And is it to benefit yourself in some way, or is it to maybe shed some light on something that most people don't understand or aren't aware of? But knowing the motivation behind what you're doing, um, and being prepared for people to say no. And that's probably the hardest thing for lesson to learn, is that just because you have an idea and you think it's a good idea doesn't mean other people are going to go along with that idea. And and be prepared. People have told me no many different times, and something I really wanted to do, but it people felt for whatever reason they were uncomfortable with it, or what they didn't feel it was in their best interest, or they didn't feel like it was going to uh, advance anything or help with anything. So I think being prepared for people to say no, uh, and not to take it personally, because there are reasons behind that. As Jeremy was talking about, there's a long history of people exploiting Native communities, um, a long history of people appropriating our culture and our heritage for their own benefit. And so, but going through those protocols is important. And I think here's the one thing, if you're going to get a takeaway from this, besides what Jeremy said, that we're still here, we're contemporary peoples, we haven't gone anywhere. The other lesson I think people should get out of this is ask. Most people don't ask when they go in and they want to do a project. When they go into a community somewhere, they don't ask. They just assume, oh, we're going to honor you by doing this, or we're going to do this and it's going to benefit you, but they don't ask. And I think that's the beginning of the trust, is by asking and by explaining what you're trying to do. And that's the first step. So I don't know how many times, we honor you by calling our team the Savages or the Redskins or whatever it is. We're honoring you. Well, did you ever ask how we wanted to be honored? And that's not the way we want to be honored. So asking is really important. And that's the beginning of building the trust.
Yeah, and I will tag on. I'm going to go on a little bit of a tangent, and I'm going to come back. Um, the number one thing, the number one advantage each of you individually as filmmakers have is your own individual perspective. And your life is unique and your experiences are unique. So the best thing you can do as filmmakers is to not look for something that's out, but look for something that's within if you're telling stories. Something that is part of your community that is important to you, little moments that can be illuminated and that people need to know about your community. And then kind of going back, I'm going to take this first question, address this first question. How do you work with the native peoples? I'll give you a little bit of an example. I'm working on a different film. It is about wildfires, and native peoples have wildfires. You think about it for a second. It's high adrenaline, and it's like exciting. It's like, oh, this is fun. Stuff's on fire. It's like action, action, action. The film that I'm helping produce right now, my job has been to bring in a well-rounded view of Native representation into that. And so Native peoples have a different relationship with fire and wildfire and forest fire than maybe most of us realize, as a partner. Wildfire and harkening back to the Red Rock, their personhood of the world, the personhood of our natural world around us as elements, as objects and beings. Fire itself is another being. It's a force of nature that is part of our world that we're partners in this world with, right? So you think about that mindset, when you're talking about your role, as a producer or as a filmmaker, starting with understanding. Um, and it takes work. You have to understand, the perspective you're maybe asking to or inviting. You maybe don't understand yourself. And so having the humility of going in and like, I'm going to hear, um, my questions answered in ways that I did not anticipate. I don't know the answers, going in and asking the questions that I don't know the answers to, right? And having humility to listen to those answers and let those answers guide your path toward creation of what the art that you're making instead of maybe dictating it, right?
Okay.
Um,
Well, we
sorry.
have three good ones
Okay.
now. So the first one is ideally, at what stage of the production would tribal governments be approached? Is that the job of screenwriters, producers, studios, all of the above?
I think really whoever's the project manager or the producer of the film really should make those connections. Whoever's kind of organizing, managing the production should be there, and through that introduce the director and other people that are part of that production. But that's kind of part of the producer's responsibility to kind of do that part of it. But it's also appropriate to uh, and the director in particular, the person that's going to be in the community needs to be introduced at that point in time. So, the producer and the tribal leader aren't necessarily going to be the people on the ground doing the work, but they need to, as kind of the heads of both sides of that need to acknowledge each other and then acknowledge the people that are going to be working on that project.
Yeah. And on to kind of to circle back to this new film that I'm working on, we have, approached the Karuk tribe in Northern California, um, who I have a previous relationship, and our goal in the film is to incorporate this indigenous perspective to fire. Well, we didn't just roll in there, right, with cameras. It's a situation where you find the right people to talk to and the right people to who understands what you're trying to accomplish. In addition to that, as a part of this production that we're working on, the tribe itself has, like we've negotiated with them, as a part of their participation, they will have part of the residual benefit of it once it's produced, right? And so that's that reciprocity we're talking about, allowing them to utilize some of the footage from the film, but also benefit financially, and also the benefit of having the agency of telling the story from their own words, right? Those are the kinds of reciprocity that we kind of seek, and that's part of the trust building process. So it's really difficult when you're working in Native country to find the right people to talk to, right, JPH? Because you have to find somebody who understands your vision, and it's up to you to be able to communicate it really well. And also, you have to come into it with humility and um, um, a little bit a spirit of deference. It's like, maybe I don't know the best way, and so you come to these projects with open ears and open heart. And what happened for me every time it always happens for me. And I'm sure JPH feels the same with a lot of the things that he's produced and created. Once you open your heart and your mind to that feedback, everything just gets better, more nuanced, deeper, because you've humbled yourself to the task that you're trying to accomplish.
Okay. Travis Lamb says, thank you for your time and care in sharing these vital perspectives and stories. Is it still possible to view the film in some capacity?
I'll take that one. We are currently, this particular film, we are in beginning stages of a festival run. But we're also just trying to find distribution. And so this was made for a PBS audience, like a general audience, right? And so we're hoping to find a distributor. We have not figured that out yet, but we continue bringing it to film festivals. At some point, this will be available for you, and we want to be as widely available as possible. With Indigenous stories, it's really important for as many people to see them as possible because we can change hearts and minds when people get to see these kinds of stories.
So thank you. JC Long says, any thoughts on the intersectionality between telling Indigenous historical stories and those of enslaved people / the African diaspora, especially the 5 tribes removed from the South?
Absolutely, JPH.
Yeah, so actually, I think the Cherokee Nation is developing a documentary about that particular topic, um, the kind of the integration of descendants of African slaves in indigenous communities, and especially with those 5 tribes, um, the Cherokee, Choctaw, Chickasaw, uh, Muskogee, and Seminole. Those tribes actually owned slaves at one point in time, black slaves, but over time they were integrated into the culture, and actually, many of those tribes uh, provided citizenship for the people who were slaves at one point in time. So very complicated. I actually produced an exhibition for the Smithsonian Traveling Exhibition Services called Indivisible. It's just about um, Native Americans, African Americans, and forming even distinct communities between those two groups, kind of being mixed together. And the irony is of those two groups is that Native Americans are indigenous to this land, and were here when Europeans arrived, and then Africans were brought here against their will, and those are the two groups that didn't come here voluntarily, or the natives were already here, and African Americans did not come here voluntarily. So it's very interesting the dynamics between descendants of African slaves and Native Americans. And like I said, I think Cherokee Nation is actually producing a documentary on that particular subject, and working with descendants of African slaves and working with citizens of the Cherokee Nation.
And on that, just to add to that, it's really important to tell these stories. It's really important to tell these stories because these are the kinds of stories that don't get illuminated. And so you as a filmmaker, JC, if you have a particular tie to these stories, there's nothing stopping you from exploring that, and that's what we hope your generation of filmmakers will take the baton and start telling these hard things. And they're not always that hard. There's beauty there too. You have to remember there's beauty and pain in all great stories. And so don't be afraid to explore both.
Well said. Okay, Seth asks, he works with Native youth in Alaska, and he's noticed that students feel more motivation when their films are seen at a larger national scale, especially since we sometimes feel isolated in Alaska. Any advice for helping our youth get their voice out there to a wider audience? One way is our contest. So please encourage them to submit.
Well, you know, we're looking for a distributor for our film, but listen, there's this thing called the internet and this thing called YouTube. And I see a lot of young people putting content out on social media and on YouTube, and that you can reach millions of people that way. And so I encourage people to continue, make these films, make short films, and get them out there, get it on. You don't need a distributor for that. You can distribute that yourself basically through, social media and YouTube. So that's I'm actually working on a project in Alaska right now with Chugach and they're building a museum in downtown Anchorage, and we're going to be doing some content. Hopefully I get to work with Jeremy on this too, but we're developing some content for that. And there are some young Indigenous filmmakers. And if you're a filmmaker too, I want to get your information because we're going to start next summer. Hopefully we're going to start developing some content that will be part of this new museum that's being built in Anchorage. And we'd love to work with young filmmakers in the communities there. So, but yeah, there are ways you don't need a distributor necessarily to get this content. Actually, getting your content out there might draw some attention to somebody who wants to work with you to produce something larger. But that's kind of my opinion. I don't know, Jeremy, if you got.
I mean, I would just say you're not alone in feeling invisible. I think there's a lot of us out there that feel invisible and have felt invisible for a long time. And that's the power of film, because film transports you into a place that you could not possibly potentially even go or experience. You can see the world through film. And so I would flip that on its head and say, you have so much power to tell your story than you've ever had. When I was your age, there was no such thing as YouTube. You know what I mean? There was no search. There was no internet. Oh, gray hair. But you're not invisible. I think we're in a period of history. Although things seem a little hard out there, we're in a period where everyone is seeing each other for the first time anew. I think you have a story to tell. I understand. I think we all identify with not being seen. But that if you take this mission of making film and making art, you're going to be seen and you're going to be heard. That's what artists do and accomplish. So just stay after it, because nothing worth doing is accomplished easily, ever. So I understand. I feel for you, and kind of hurts my heart. But also, you have the power. You can do it. You can do it. People, you have something worth hearing. All of you, every single person out there has something worth hearing. Promise.
Well, on that note, thank you so much, both of you. Thank you, Jeremy and James, for joining us, and thanks to everybody who tuned in. And we hope you'll join us for our next session. You'll have to stay tuned and check out our website, lincolnpresidential.org. And before you head out, please take a moment to complete the short survey, and your feedback is important and helps us make the programs even better. Thanks for being part of the latest generation community, and have a wonderful evening and take care. Thanks, everyone.